I should have never, ever even been able to match with him because he should have never been able to make another account.
Denver, Colorado. In the eyes of the medical community, Dr. Stephen Matthews was the ideal figure. Intelligent, composed, soft-spoken, and trusted completely by his patients. A top graduate from a prestigious medical school, Matthews quickly landed a position at one of the most reputable cardiology centers in the American West. He was a frequent speaker at conferences, contributed to medical journals, and was named to the local top doctors list for years. Outside the hospital, he was a classic gentleman, well-groomed, charming, and articulate, so it raised no alarm when he dated women he met in or around the medical field. Known as a dedicated, respectable, single doctor, Matthews found it easy to earn trust. But behind that flawless persona hid a terrifying secret, one that took nearly a decade to expose. It all began with what seemed like an ordinary date. A woman named Audrey accepted Matthews' invitation to dinner. Everything appeared normal until she began to feel unusually dizzy after drinking a glass of wine he poured. Her memory blurred. The next morning, she woke up in Matthews' apartment clothes, disheveled, body sore, and no recollection of what had happened. Matthews told her she drank too much and needed rest, but Audrey's instincts told her something was terribly wrong. She didn't stay silent. Audrey went to the police, submitted blood tests, and the results changed everything. A powerful sedative used only in surgeries was found in her system. After Audrey's story went public, 10 other women came forward, describing similar encounters with the same man, Dr. Stephen Matthews. How had this man evaded the law for so long? How did he manipulate, drug, and violate women, while maintaining the pristine image of a trusted physician? And could there be more victims still trapped in silence? In the next chapters, we'll uncover the chilling details of his methods, the psychological control he exerted, and the courtroom unraveling of a man who built a life on deception. This is Echoes of the Court, where every trial whispers a deeper truth. If you're drawn to courtroom revelations, hidden horrors, and the quiet pursuit of justice, subscribe now and join us in exposing the darkness behind the white coat. After Audrey spoke out, a ripple effect began. 10 more women from different backgrounds, ages, and professions found the courage to share their own haunting stories. Some were former patients, others were casual acquaintances. A few had met Matthews through dating apps, but their accounts echoed the same pattern: a sudden blackout, a missing night, and a lingering sense of violation they couldn't explain until now. Claire, one of the victims, remembered feeling dizzy after sipping water at Matthews' home. The next morning, she woke up disoriented and undressed. Matthews casually claimed they had a great night, but Claire couldn't recall a single detail. She dismissed it at the time, blaming alcohol, until Audrey's story reached the headlines. Then everything clicked. Justine, a fellow healthcare worker, had always trusted Matthews, but as she replayed her own night with him, how she passed out unusually fast, how he insisted she just needed sleep, the puzzle pieces began to form a darker image. What she once brushed off as stress or misjudgment now looked disturbingly intentional. Investigators began connecting the dots. None of the women had previously filed formal complaints, a testament to how effectively Matthews erased suspicion and silenced discomfort. But when police searched his home and clinic, they found the evidence he couldn't bury: high-dosage sedatives, controlled substances prescribed outside legal bounds, surveillance equipment, and manipulated patient files. Prosecutors now believed the number of actual victims could be in the dozens, perhaps over 50. Yet many remained in the shadows, paralyzed by shame, fear, or the belief that no one would believe them. One of the most disturbing truths in this case is how many of these women had convinced themselves they were to blame for drinking too much, for trusting a doctor, for not remembering. In court, these women were hailed as witnesses of courage. Their voices, once suppressed by confusion and stigma, now formed a chorus strong enough to bring a predator to justice. But one question loomed large: how could such a monster hide in plain sight for so long? Was he protected? Or was the medical system itself blind to its own vulnerabilities? In the next part, we'll explore Matthews' disturbing psychological profile, the clinical precision behind his manipulations, and the twisted logic that allowed him to thrive undetected. This wasn't random, it was strategy. Stephen Matthews wasn't just a predator. He was a planner, a master manipulator, armed not with weapons, but with medical knowledge, emotional intelligence, and institutional power. A respected cardiologist trained in human physiology, Matthews understood precisely how to weaken the body and cloud the mind without ever raising suspicion. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Matthews kept a disturbing personal archive. Inside his home, authorities found encrypted files, detailed notes, and time-stamped records describing his dates in clinical terms. Each entry listed names, dosages, reactions, levels of consciousness like a twisted experiment diary. There were no trophies, no sentimental keepsakes, only data. Cold, calculated data. The prescriptions told another story. Using his license, Matthews had access to controlled substances meant for surgical procedures, drugs that could incapacitate someone in minutes. He often cited blood pressure monitoring or sleep aid as excuses, and in private settings, his home, a hotel, a quiet corner, at a medical conference, he'd introduce these substances without a word of warning. A forensic psychiatrist, assigned to analyze Matthews' behavior, concluded that he wasn't psychotic, nor delusional. In fact, his emotional IQ was alarmingly high. He could read discomfort in a person's posture, isolate their insecurities, and slowly dismantle their self-trust. If he hadn't been a doctor, the expert said, he could have been a hypnotist or something far worse. What set Matthews apart from typical offenders was his lack of overt aggression. He didn't use force. He didn't need to. He weaponized trust. And he did so in a way that made victims question their own memories. Was I drunk? Did I say yes? Am I overreacting? Those doubts were his greatest tools. In court, his defense team tried to paint him as a lonely man under pressure, someone who blurred lines due to mental fatigue or emotional instability. But the prosecution had evidence of planning going back nearly 10 years. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a pattern, a methodology. One silent clip from a building security camera crushed any remaining illusions. In it, Matthews gently supported an unconscious woman into an elevator, smiling faintly as the doors closed. There was no rush, no panic, just quiet control. That moment shifted the mood of the courtroom entirely. From then on, he was no longer Dr. Matthews. He was simply the defendant. But how does someone maintain this charade for so long? What allowed him to exploit the system with such precision? In the next part, we'll enter the courtroom itself, where victims turned their fear into testimony, and Matthews was finally forced to face the consequences of what he'd spent years hiding. The courtroom in Denver was packed. Onlookers, reporters, and survivors filled every seat, while others waited in the hallway just to hear a fragment of what would unfold. The day had come for Stephen Matthews to face the voices he had once silenced. And this time, those voices would not be ignored. Audrey, the first to speak, stood before him and began. I thought I was going crazy. I blamed myself. But now I know I was never alone, and I was never wrong. Her voice trembled, but her stare was unwavering. She spoke of waking up in his bed, the confusion, the shame, and the years it took her to reclaim her truth. The room fell silent as she described the haunting after-effects, panic attacks, broken trust, the inability to be touched without fear. Claire followed. Then Justine. Then Monica. One by one, the women Matthews had victimized reclaimed their identities, no longer hidden behind anonymous statements or police reports. Some cried, some read letters, others looked directly into Matthews' eyes, demanding that he see them not as mistakes to be forgotten, but as people whose lives he shattered. One woman revealed she had checked into a psychiatric clinic, convinced she had imagined everything. Another confessed she lost her job because she couldn't work with male doctors anymore. Another recounted how she once Googled how to know if something happened to you while you were unconscious before falling into despair. Each story was different, but every one of them carried the same wound, delivered by the same man. Matthews' defense attorney tried to deflect, pointing to gaps in memory, inconsistencies in recall. But the prosecution was ready. Medical records, controlled substance logs, internal emails, even hotel keycard swipes all painted a picture of deliberate, repeated abuse. It was not hearsay. It was not speculation. It was evidence. A key moment came when the prosecution played silent surveillance footage. Matthews leading a limp woman into his building after a dinner date, her head slumped forward, her body unable to walk on its own. He smiled politely at a neighbor as he passed. The camera froze just as the elevator doors closed. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. When it was time for sentencing, Matthews wore a gray suit and kept his eyes down. He wept perhaps for the first time, but the judge didn't flinch. 158 years in prison. Not because the system wanted to make an example of him, but because his victims deserved acknowledgement that what was done to them mattered. And yet, for all its weight, the sentence couldn't undo what had been done. It couldn't return lost years, restore broken trust, or erase sleepless nights. The gavel brought justice but not healing. In the next part, we'll explore the institutional failures that allowed this to go on for so long. Was Matthews a lone predator, or did a system built on trust become the perfect hiding place for a man who knew exactly how to manipulate it? When the verdict echoed across newsrooms 158 years behind bars, it wasn't just the weight of the sentence that shocked the public. It was who the defendant had been: a celebrated cardiologist, a keynote speaker, a guest lecturer at medical schools, a man whose name had long been spoken with admiration in hospital hallways. And so began a second reckoning, not in court, but in the corridors of medicine and media. How had Stephen Matthews managed to operate unchecked for nearly a decade? The answer, investigators found, lay in the culture of silence and deference that often shields the powerful, especially those wearing white coats. An internal audit at the hospital where Matthews worked revealed troubling signs. Reports from patients who said they blacked out during consultations. Nurses expressing discomfort after being asked to leave during private exams. Irregularities in prescriptions written under vague pretexts. Yet none of these warning signs ever made it past middle management. Why? One administrator admitted off the record, "You don't want to accuse someone like him unless you're absolutely sure. That kind of thing can ruin careers." In one case, a young nurse had filed a formal concern about Matthews' behavior with a female patient. Instead of support, she was advised to think carefully before escalating it, a veiled warning about damaging reputations, including her own. And just like that, the moment passed. And Matthews continued. Journalists unearthed even more troubling details. An anonymous complaint from 2016 sent to the Colorado Medical Board alleged inappropriate conduct and suspicious drug use by Matthews. But because the tip lacked evidence and the sender couldn't be contacted, the board archived the file, never once confronting the doctor in question. The fallout rocked the medical community. Some professionals expressed outrage, betrayal, and shame. Others, more disturbingly, defended Matthews, insisting the evidence was circumstantial or that he never seemed the type. Their words revealed a deeper problem: the myth of the untouchable expert, someone assumed incapable of wrongdoing simply because of status, credentials, and demeanor. But perhaps the most chilling realization was this: Matthews didn't just manipulate women, he manipulated an entire system. A system designed to protect the vulnerable, yet one that allowed a predator to roam freely, because no one wanted to believe evil could look so professional. Still, amid the institutional failures, there was a glimmer of accountability. The Colorado legislature introduced reforms mandating independent oversight of sexual misconduct claims within healthcare facilities. Several hospitals began cross-referencing prescription logs against patient reports. The audit systems that didn't exist during Matthews' reign are now being built. Yet the most lasting cost wasn't systemic, it was personal. Women who can't walk into a clinic without panic. Others who haven't been on a date since. Parents who no longer trust doctors with their daughters. These are the invisible scars that justice can't measure. In the next part, we'll confront the consequences of silence, not only for Matthews' victims, but for the society that allowed this to happen. How many more are out there? And what does it truly take for someone to be believed? When the headlines faded and the courtroom emptied, Stephen Matthews began serving the rest of his life behind bars. But for many, the sentence didn't bring closure, it opened deeper wounds. Why did it take 11 women to stop one man? Why did the first 10 go unheard? The answer, tragically, lies in a truth as old as abuse itself. Silence protects power, especially when that power wears a stethoscope. Most of Matthews' victims said the same thing. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Not because their stories were unbelievable, but because he was. A respected physician, a man with awards, degrees, and glowing reviews. And they? They were just women who drank a glass of wine, blacked out, and woke up in confusion. In a society that often asks victims to prove their trauma, Matthews never had to explain anything until it was too late. One survivor confessed she Googled, "Can you be violated and not remember it?" Another said she saw 4 different therapists before she could even say Matthews' name. They weren't silent out of fear. They were silent out of shame. Shame that had been planted in them by Matthews himself. With every soft word, every gaslighting dismissal, every look of calm denial, he made them question their own instincts. That's the real horror. He didn't just steal their bodies, he stole their clarity. What made Matthews so dangerous wasn't only what he did, but how convincingly he made people believe he hadn't. His crimes weren't loud. They didn't leave bruises. They left gaps in memory, confusion, anxiety, and years of self-doubt. He turned trust into a weapon and silence into his shield. And the institutions? They helped him not by action, but by inaction. Supervisors who shrugged off concerns, boards who ignored anonymous tips, colleagues who felt something was off but never spoke. That is the ecosystem in which men like Matthews thrive, where suspicion dies quietly and reputation is sacred. Following the trial, Colorado enacted stricter protocols for reporting misconduct, including protected hotlines, anonymous third-party reviews, and whistleblower protections. But for many survivors, it was too little, too late. Because no amount of reform can give back what silence took from them. Audrey, the woman who first spoke out, put it best. I didn't want to be the face of this. I wanted to be believed the first time. I wanted to be safe the first time. I wanted him to stop the first time. But if I had to be the first to make him stop, then I'm glad I didn't stay quiet. In the final part of our story, we'll step back from the courtroom and ask the hardest question of all. Was this the story of one monster, or a mirror held up to a society that still protects charm over truth? There's a reason Stephen Matthews got away with it for so long. It wasn't just his intelligence or his credentials or even his medical license. It was the illusion of safety that his white coat provided, an illusion we, as a society, helped maintain. We are conditioned to trust doctors. They heal, they comfort, they save lives. And Matthews knew that. He weaponized that trust, wrapping his darkness in professionalism, in clinical jargon, in calm bedside manner. He didn't need to hide behind closed doors. He operated in plain sight. Because no one ever expects the man saving your life to also be the one slowly dismantling it. In truth, Matthews was not just a predator. He was a product of a system that rewards authority, dismisses suspicion, and discourages confrontation. In hospitals, in boardrooms, in social circles, his charm was treated as proof of goodness. And every time someone felt uncomfortable but said nothing, he learned a little more about what he could get away with. This wasn't just a story about him. This was a story about how far people will go to protect the image of a good man, even when the reality is far more sinister. Even now, in the aftermath, there are whispers that Matthews was an exception, a rare case. But is he? Or is he simply the one who finally got caught? Because for every Stephen Matthews, how many more are still out there, hiding behind degrees, handshakes, and glowing resumes? How many women are still questioning their memories, convincing themselves they imagined it, because the man who hurt them seemed too respectable to be capable of harm? What this case demands of us is not just outrage, but change. Not just belief in survivors, but a system that listens to them the first time. A culture that doesn't require 11 victims to be taken seriously. Matthews now sits behind bars. No lab coat, no office, no nameplate, just a number. But his victims, they walk free, yet still carry what he left behind. Sleepless nights, fractured trust, and an unshakable question. What if no one had believed me? They shouldn't have had to fight this hard. They shouldn't have had to fight at all. And maybe that's the echo that should linger long after the trial. Justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it only whispers. And we have to be ready to hear it. Thank you for watching Echoes of the Court, where every trial tells a deeper story, and every verdict reveals more than guilt or innocence. If you're drawn to true crime, courtroom drama, and the fragile balance between justice and silence, subscribe now. Because truth deserves more than a headline, it deserves a voice.